Hey guys. In today's video, I bring you an unbelievable and chilling story. Let's meet Sullivan Ward, a former energy industry executive who died clinically for 17 days and returned with stunning revelations about the fate of humanity. On the other side, he encountered a being of light who showed him who we really are, why we are here, and what is about to happen to the world. What he saw will shake everything you believe. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this. Activate the bell to receive all notifications and write here in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Now get ready, because this journey will transform your view of life and death. I never had problems with goals. I destroyed them. It was like an addiction, perhaps the only one the world applauded. At 32, I was already signing contracts that most men my age couldn't even dream of understanding. My office in downtown Houston had panoramic views and the smell of expensive leather. They told me I was brilliant. I was smiling, but inside, I was dying. The first thing to fall apart was my marriages. The first ended when my ex discovered that I spent more time with spreadsheets and cocaine than with her. The second couldn't stand my silence. And the third? It lasted until I became a stranger in my own house. I had 10 children, the result of relationships that I built and destroyed as if they were commercial buildings. 4 lived with me in 2007. They saw me, obeyed me, but they didn't know me. And if I'm honest, I didn't know them either. Cocaine was my spiritual food. It started as a way to cope with the long trips, the high-risk negotiations, the nights when the phone never stopped ringing. $3,000 a week. Nothing my bank account couldn't handle. The problem was that the hole inside me was bottomless, and I knew. But it continued. I had a ritual. I would come back from the office, go into the back room as far away from the children as possible, and isolate myself there. No music, no TV, just me, my ego, and the drugs. The silence was so absolute that I could almost hear the muffled scream of my soul. Once, in one of those moments, I looked at myself in the mirror. Red eyes, clenched jaw, sweat dripping even with the air conditioning on full blast. I muttered to myself, "You're going straight to hell, man." Then he laughs, but that sentence stuck, like a thorn that I pretended not to feel. I was considered functional. I signed billion-dollar contracts on a Tuesday, snorted half a gram on a Wednesday, lectured to CEOs on a Thursday. But the silence on Friday night was enough for me to remember. There was no one there. Just me. And the hole. That night, something inside me broke. I had come back from an exhausting meeting, and instead of going straight to the back room as I always did, I sat down on the couch. A simple gesture, but strange to me. Everything was silent. The children slept. The house smelled of disinfectant and boredom. I grabbed the remote control like someone trying to escape from themselves, and that's when it happened. The television turned on directly to a channel that I never remembered having tuned to. The program was Intervention. I had never watched it. On the screen, a man, executive, well-dressed, family man, cocaine addict, talked about how he took drugs alone at night, hidden from his children. He looked like me. The same age, the same lost look, the same facade of success. I felt a tightness in my chest. I turned off the TV. I got up to go to my room, but a sick curiosity made me look back. The screen was on again. The same episode, exactly the same point. My controller was still in my hand. I was paralyzed. My rational side tried to argue. It must have been an automatic rerun. But a deeper part whispered, "Watch." And I watched. Until the end. When the episode ended, I sat there motionless for maybe an hour. Then I got up, walked slowly to my room, lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. The fatigue was so dense that it seemed to pull me out of my body. I don't know when exactly it happened, but suddenly, everything changed. The feeling was strange. I was awake, but I wasn't in the room. There was no bed. There was no ceiling. All around me, just darkness, dense, palpable, alive. It looked like an empty theater, and I was the only spectator. On stage, the projection of my life began. And it wasn't just any memory. It was every scene I wanted to forget. My father's screams hitting me when I was 7. My ex-wife's look of fear after a fight. My children crying behind the door. And I, always running away. The pain was like acid running through the soul. I tried to turn away, but there was nowhere to run. It was just me, my sins, and the dark. That was when I heard, not with my ears, but straight in my soul, a firm and loving voice that said, "That's enough." I woke up as if I had emerged from an ocean of pain. My sheets were soaked. He was sweating so much it felt like he had a fever, but there was no heat, just a strange feeling of filled emptiness. I looked at the clock. It was almost 7 in the evening. The last thing I remembered was going to bed at around 1 in the morning. I had slept 18 hours. I stood up staggering, still half lost between two worlds. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes were sunken, but there was something there. Different. As if the old version of me had evaporated with sweat. I was emptied, but not dead. In fact, for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I walked to the back room. The leather briefcase was in the corner of the bookshelf, where I always kept the spare. I opened it. Inside, almost $1,000 worth of cocaine. I sat in silence. I looked at the package. The drug seemed so absurd, so out of place in that new reality. It was as if I was observing something belonging to another existence, to a man I was no longer. I took the package, walked to the bathroom, and without thinking twice, threw it all down the toilet. It was almost ceremonial. I flushed the toilet and watched as everything disappeared, as if I were burying a body, my old self. That night there was no more deafening silence. What there was space. A strange, uncomfortable space, but full of potential. I sat in the living room without TV, without sound, without anything. Just me and a new kind of silence, a fertile silence. The next day, I sought help. I called, a number I had written down years before and never had the courage to use. It was from a rehabilitation center. The woman on the other end of the line had a calm, steady voice. When I said, "I think I need help," she responded with something I will never forget. "You are exactly where you need to be." And so began my journey. Not back to the man I was before addiction, but to someone I didn't yet know. The following years were not a straight road. It was a rugged desert full of thorns, mirages, and storms. But it was also in this desert that I began to hear God for the first time, not as a heavenly voice in the sky, but as a persistent whisper within me, guiding me forward, even when everything around me told me to turn back. I entered a Christian rehabilitation center on the outskirts of Houston. There I met Reverend Miles Everhart, a slow-spoken man with a snow-white beard and eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. He didn't judge me. He didn't even ask about my past. In our first conversation, he just looked at me and said, "Sullivan, the soul doesn't rot. It just moves away from the light." I spent months there, whole days digging inside me memories that I had locked under lock and key. I faced my shame, my anger, my pride. I cried like a child more times than I can count. Each session was a demolition. Every morning without cocaine, a battle. But little by little, the hole began to fill, not with answers, but with presence, with something bigger than me. It was during this period that I started writing. Initially, on loose pages, just to organize my thoughts. But soon it became a passion, a catharsis. The first book came in a rush, as if I were just transcribing something that already existed in the invisible. The title was simple: Remember Himself. Then came the second, the third, when I realized there were already almost 20. I started sharing it on social media. People started looking for me. People from all over the world. Business people, single mothers, young people in crisis. Everyone wants to know, how did you get out of rock bottom? I created a spiritual coaching program. My focus was not teaching techniques. It was helping people remember who they are, because I knew from experience that what destroys a life isn't failure, trauma, or addiction. It's forgetting. The forgetfulness of our spiritual identity. My purpose was now clear, to be a bridge between the past and the future, between pain and light, between the human and the divine. I thought I was finally living my calling. I just didn't know that. Years later, he would call me again, and this time, from the other side. It was right after a cruise with my wife, Valeria. We had spent a week in the Caribbean trying to rest, but something was already wrong. The body felt strange, as if it were too heavy to carry. On the flight back, tremors. At night, fever. The next day, I couldn't get out of bed. Valeria, who has always had a keen clinical instinct, took me to the hospital. They put me straight in the isolation ward, and the doctors started acting in a hurry. I remember one of them, a young man with tired eyes, asking me, "Can we do whatever is necessary to preserve his life?" I hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but because something inside me whispered, "This is more serious than you might think." I shook my head affirmatively. From then on, the memories become fragmented, as if I were seeing everything through a fogged glass. I remember the sound of the machines, from the alarms, of Valeria holding my hand tightly and her eyes trying to contain the tears. And then something happened that I will never forget. I felt a kind of separation, not physics, something deeper. As if my soul was being carefully unbuttoned from my body, as if a zipper was being unzipped from the inside out. It was a feeling of lightness and of surrender. I picked up the cell phone with difficulty. I typed one last message to Valeria. "ICU, isolation, intubation, I may be dying." And that was it. Then everything was silent. Breathing stopped. The heart monitor went to a straight line. The medical team ran, but I was no longer there. I had left that body. But death, I discovered, is not an end. It's a threshold. And what awaited me on the other side was not darkness. It was a door, and someone waiting for me. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the ICU. There were no tubes, there were no machines, there was no sound. The place where I woke up was silent in a way that doesn't exist here. A silence that seemed to contain all the answers I never knew how to formulate. In front of me, a gray fog hung in the air, like a veil between realities. Everything around seemed suspended, as if time had taken a vacation. And then I saw it, an open door. Not an ordinary door. It seemed to be made of light, but not the light you see with your eyes. It was as if my soul recognized that glow as something familiar. On the other side, there was something, or someone, a presence. It had no defined shape, but it was unmistakably alive and full of love, a love so pure that it took me apart. I cried without tears. I cried with the spirit. It was then that that presence asked me a question, but it wasn't with words. It went straight into me, like a wave of meaning that formed before I could even resist it. "Do you want to go home?" At that moment, I understood everything. Coming home was not a metaphor. It was literal. It was the original home of the soul. The origin. The place where everything is without needing to prove that it is. I stood there for a time I cannot measure, feeling, remembering. Everything I experienced since 2007 passed before me like a sacred dance. The books, the meetings, the healings, the tears I witnessed, the people I helped. Everything made sense. It was all part of a plan. I breathed, or perhaps just felt, a deep conviction. I'm not done yet. That's what I said to that presence, not with words, but with everything I was, with my essence. She responded, in such a simple and powerful way that it made my spirit tremble. Okay. And the next moment I heard, deep down, far away, a familiar sound, the sound of a heart beating again. The second night I came back. I didn't sleep. I didn't faint. I just went, as if consciousness had slipped out of the body again, without effort, without fear. The same gray space welcomed me, but this time the portal seemed more open, brighter. The presence was still there, constant, welcoming, as if it had been waiting for me. This time, the question was different. What are you going to do? It was direct. Not a charge, but an invitation, a reminder that the time to decide was not infinite. I knew at that moment that it wasn't enough to just want to stay. It was necessary to be clear about why. I talked about my books, about the people I helped, about my coaching program. But as I spoke, I realized that ordinary words were not enough there. Every intention was heavy in its essence, every motivation exposed. I want to keep showing people who they really are, I thought. I want to remind them that they are not walking failures, not victims, not products of trauma. I want them to know that they are sacred. The presence did not respond to me. Instead, I was pulled, not with violence, but with speed, absurd, incomprehensible. It was like crossing galaxies in seconds, as if my spirit had transformed into pure consciousness. Colors that don't exist, sounds that can't be heard, shapes that don't obey physical laws. It was all beauty, all purpose, but also power. A power so great that, if I hadn't been surrounded by something, a kind of spiritual protection, I would have disintegrated. And then I stopped. Somewhere in the universe, there was no more body, no name, no time, but there was understanding. I received a structure, a spiritual map. It was as if I was being shown the architecture of life, of identity, of purpose. Everything was part of a sacred whole, and each person brought a gift, a divine spark, but most were lost. I asked why. Why do we live so far below what we are? The answer was simple. Because you don't believe. There was no judgment in that sentence. Just true. I came back from that moment with something sealed in me, the knowledge of what I needed to teach, and most importantly, how to teach. On the third night I was taken again, but this time something was different. There was a lightness about me, almost a silent joy, as if my soul knew exactly the way, as if I was returning to a place where I finally felt whole. There was no more gray, there was no more fog, just clarity, pure and absolute. The presence was there, firm, unchanging, but now it seemed closer. There was no longer any separation between us. And then came the question, simple, direct, unadorned, but with a depth that pierced everything inside me. Are you sure? This question was not a doubt. It was a reminder, a mirror. Not about my ability, but about my commitment. About truly knowing deep down in your soul that life on the other side would be a battlefield. That coming back meant carrying everything I had seen, learned, and received, and that there would be no unseeing. The question reverberated like a bell. Are you sure? Are you ready to live without excuses? To speak up even when ridiculed? To remember every day what the whole world seems to have forgotten? I thought about my mission. In the books I haven't written yet. In people trapped in addictions, fears, lies. I thought about my children, about Valeria, and about every person who has ever written to me saying, "You made me remember who I am." And then, with all the conviction in my being, I replied, "Yes, I'm sure." The presence only responded, "All good." There was nothing more to be said. The deal was done. The choice sealed. And then, gently, I felt as if my essence was being sewn back into my body, as if someone was aligning every part of my soul with my flesh, my mind, my physical heart. A return. a sacred reconnection. When I woke up, 14 days had passed. I was in the ICU. Intubated, weak, he could barely move a finger. But everything in me screamed a single certainty. It's time. I woke up slowly, as if emerging from a deep, sacred dream. Everything about me hurt. My muscles were weak. My throat felt scratchy from the tube they had removed just hours before, and my eyes burned from the hospital light. But none of that mattered. The only thing that filled my mind, my chest, my soul, was the mission. I remember Valeria sitting next to me. Her face was haggard, with deep circles under her eyes, and an indescribable relief in her eyes. When he saw me awake, he put his hand to his mouth and cried in silence. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. She squeezed my hand tightly and said, "You came back to me." Yes, but I had also come back with something inside me that wasn't there before. Absolute clarity, a total absence of fear. No doubt, no hesitation. I knew what I had received. I knew I had committed to something bigger than myself, and he could no longer retreat. In the days that followed, even though I couldn't walk, I asked for paper and a pen. I wrote like a madman, with a shaky hand but a sharp mind. I drafted the outline of the framework I received from the other side, a spiritual framework that would help people reconnect with their true identity. I called this project The Context Book, because I realized that most people aren't living the wrong life. They're just stuck in the wrong context. Every line I wrote seemed to come from a higher place. I didn't feel rushed. I felt purpose. There was no more room for distractions or the desire to please. For the first time, my life made sense in every detail, including mistakes. Mainly in mistakes. The doctors called me a miracle. They said that few come back from a 17-day coma completely lucid. But I knew the truth. I hadn't just come back. I had been sent back. And that changed everything. Today, I live like someone who has already died and came back with their eyes completely open. I don't feel afraid anymore. Not from death, not from criticism, not from failure. That insecurity that once tormented me, that made me seek escape in white powder and power, has completely disappeared. Everything is clear now. I know who I am. I know what I came here to do. And more than that, I know that each person who crosses my path also carries something divine within them, even if they have forgotten it. What moves me now is no longer ambition, but the calling. A constant, silent call, but impossible to ignore. I live to help people remember the spark within them, whether through my books, the meetings I have with groups, or the messages I receive from strangers who read my story and said, "Now I understand. I can too." I no longer fight suffering. I see him as a teacher, a mirror that reveals where we still need to heal. I no longer chase results. I walk with purpose, and I no longer worry about what others think. I simply am. Experience has taught me that God is not a judge waiting to punish us. He is the Father who invites us every day to come home, even while we are still here. Life, with all its pain, beauty, and confusion, is a rare opportunity for spiritual growth. Every choice we make defines us. I deeply believe in free will, not as a religious concept, but as a creative force. We are not defined by what happened to us, but by what we choose to do with it. And when we die, we won't take our CV or our assets. We will only take one thing: who we choose to be. That's the only baggage that matters. Many ask me if I think we are in the last days, and I answer, it could be. But that doesn't change the most important thing. What are you going to do with the time you still have? Because in the end, the question won't be, what did you achieve? It will be, did you remember who it was? Do you choose to live with love, truth, and courage? This is the question that guides me every day. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video, and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.